Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. We have what I think is going to be a really interesting hour or so ahead of us. But before we get into that discussion, I wanted to give you a bit of background on who I am, why we're here, and then who you'll be hearing from as part of this discussion of employer resource networks. My name is Brent Orrell, and I'm a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where my research focuses on policies relating to workforce development, poverty, and criminal justice reform. Today, we're going to be discussing something called employer resource networks, which are tools that can help better ensure connections between low-income employees and their employers. Now, I first encountered ERNs during my service as Acting Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration back in 2008. And as part of my responsibilities there, I had the opportunity to visit an ERN program in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that was part of what were then called the WIRE grants, which was Workforce Innovations for Regional Economic Development. And one of the reasons that I wanted to visit that particular grantee was because I had heard about this very thoughtful, community-based, employer-focused approach to helping entry-level and low-income workers gain access to employment and to advance in their jobs. That had always been a major concern for me. When I started at the Labor Department, I was running something called the Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, which was really focused on low-income or low-wage and people who had challenges or barriers in attaching to the workforce. So I got to know a little bit about ERN then. I was very impressed with it and the conversations that I had with not just the people who were working in the employer resource network, but the employers that were connected to the ERN. And then about a year or so ago, I reconnected with one of our panelists today, James Vander. And I was really happy to learn just how much progress had been made over the last 12 years in promoting this approach to other regions, locations across the country. Also about that time, I caught up with Luke Shaefer at the University of Michigan, who had an ongoing interest in ERNs and was acquainted with the work that was going on in Michigan. And what we agreed to was a research project looking at what the evidence can tell us about the effectiveness of employer resource networks as a strategy for low wage and new entry workers. And that brings us to today. Luke and one of his associates at the University of Michigan have done a very thorough job of reviewing the evidence and put together this report. And in just a minute, we're going to be turning to him to have him discuss his findings as they were developed over the last several months. So as I said, Luke will be giving us the overview of the findings. And then we're going to turn to James Vander, who's also joined us, and one of the ERN employer partners, Jason Heyboer, for a conversation about the report findings. And then finally, we will be going to a Q&A. So I want to give you just a little bit of additional background on the speakers, and then we're going to turn it right over to Luke Shaefer for the report findings. Dr. Shaefer is the Herman and Amelie Cohn Professor of Social Justice and Social Policy at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He is very well known in the poverty sphere. He's been published everywhere from the New York Times to The Economist, and his work has been supported by everyone from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to the US Census Bureau. James Vander took the ERN program from Michigan and turned it into one that is now operating in 14 states. He serves as president of the Michigan ERN and provides leadership support to all of the affiliates across the country. And finally, we have Jason Heyboer, HR manager at Lacks Enterprises in Michigan. Jason has worked in diverse fields from manufacturing to client relations to his current role in HR. I'm so glad he's going to be able to offer his unique perspective here. He has worked with the ERN program as an employer and is going to be able to give us his insights on the benefits of the ERN system. So with no further ado, Luke, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you will have control of the presentation for the next 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll come back for Q&A.
Thanks, Brent. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you all and to talk about a model that I'm really quite excited about. I've really enjoyed working with Brent and his team at AEI on this particular project. So I'm going to try to keep my introductory comments fairly brief so that we can get to the folks that really make this program work. But I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of the model and some of the evidence as I see where it stands right now. I direct an initiative at the University of Michigan called Poverty Solutions. So we try to move beyond basic research on the causes and consequences of poverty to really partner with communities, employers, and policymakers to find new ways to prevent and alleviate poverty, to really try to figure out what can we do about it. So this is really in line with the type of work that we want to do. In my own research, I do both quantitative work on poverty and also qualitative work. And in a project from a number of years ago, a book that I wrote, I spent a lot of time talking to very, very, very poor families in the United States, just getting to know them over a matter of months and years, really. And we were always struck when we would ask families, if we came back in a year and things were going really well, right? That you'd really sort of moved up the ladder and things were better in your family, what would it look like? And strikingly, to a family, they would say, I would have a job, a stable job, paying at that point in time $10 to $12 an hour. I think we had one family that mentioned $14 an hour. And I would have a place of my own. And this question of saying that work was the way that the families that we got to know saw as their path, right, was really striking to me. And I think striking is an agenda that many people could come around. But as I think about that, I think about the quote from Fred Keller. He's CEO of Cascade Engineering, and I think one of the initial sort of champions, right, of this type of work. Got really interested during the welfare reform era of trying to bring previous public assistance recipients into his company. He's quoted as saying, we weren't prepared to receive them and they weren't prepared to work. So what are the models, right, where we can fit these things, right? We can align to make it a good investment for companies and successful for families who both have trouble accessing jobs, but probably even more so trouble maintaining them. I think into that mix, we see ERNs. ERNs, whoops. I really think they hold promise for addressing the societal challenge of unstable labor market attachment among low-earning workers, while also increasing productivity and reducing churn among entry-level workers. Importantly to me, they're driven by employers, right? These projects, these types of partnerships can be done together with government. They can be done together with private entities, but really they have to be driven by employers, and that's what makes them work, and that's what can make them successful. Now, as a social scientist, I have to say there's no rigorous evaluation of the ERN model to date, right? Looking at all the pieces, and it's challenging because of the way that these are structured to figure out how you do that. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the elements of the model show incredible promise and can make a difference. When we connect coaching, right, success coaching to employer-driven training, we can boost earnings and enhance mobilities. And employers working together can solve problems collectively that no single entity can do alone. So when we think about the basics of this model, just looking at it, right, as an outside observer, I see it's important that these are community-based, right? They're contextualized in a community like Grand Rapids. They're employer-led, and they're a collective model where employers share the cost of employee development and training. And they're designed to really increase the job retention, improve worker productivity for entry-level and low-income employees. So in doing so, they can both help employers, help firms enhance their workforce, and also help society by increasing strong outcomes. This is a growing model, right? So the very first, James is really, I think, the brainchild behind this, right? He started to build this starting in Michigan, and you can see it's sort of grown out throughout the Midwest and making inroads across the country. So it's a growing model, and ERN USA provides the sort of infrastructure to help sets of employers who are interested in pursuing it. So what does this look through? Let me just walk you through a logic model of ERNs. It has to start with 6 to 10 smaller medium-sized businesses in a community who want to work together. And I think sometimes this probably takes a bit of a change of a mindset, right? These are usually firms that are in the same industry, right? They may see each other as competitors. And this is a place where they have to decide, we're going to work together on some of these issues to try to enhance our own outcomes and also outcomes for the community. They're funded through membership fees, right? So this is a place where it's important for employers to have some skin in the game, right? To be invested in it, to see it as something that they've invested in and are going to work towards. But it can also be supported by philanthropy and government contracts. And you can see sort of a model as time increases, sort of those funding mixes changes. It has to, one of the key critical pieces of it is a success coach model. So these small and medium-sized businesses would get together, and through these membership fees, they would partner to pay for a success coach. And this would be someone who both works with employees, right, and helps them sort of chart a path to success, helps them in moments of crisis when that time when they can't get to work because their car is broken down or they're having family challenges. How do you navigate that? How do you talk to employers? So, the word case management might be used here, but one of the things as I understand the success coach model, that's a bit different is it's not about, helping people think about their problems, or it's not therapy in any way. It's really problem solving, right? We're going to get together and figure out, how do we get you to work today, and how do we help you achieve your goals in the long run? The activities of this ERN would be collaboratively funding and developing education and training opportunities. So through this collective, right, these 6 to 10 small and medium-sized employers can get together and figure out what are the training, right, type of activities that our workers really would benefit from, that we can work together to provide, rather than having to go it alone on every single one. They can define specialized resources and supports. So one piece of the puzzle is success coaches figuring out what are those resources in the communities that I can help our employees connect to. And then also maybe there are things that we as a set of employers can offer on top of those that would help people be successful. One important distinction is the success coaching, right? So there are a lot of models that provide very low cost types of services. We have a plethora, a myriad of soft skills type trainings. And those things can be successful, but usually on their own, they have limited impact. So a goal here is to provide sort of high touch coaching, right? How do we really provide something added for folks, both to identify, sort of address those immediate crises, and also help them improve their position over time. So both defining sort of a set of supports that the ERN is going to offer that's overlaid on top of helping employees access additional community-based supports, and really providing sort of a type of service, right? Combining those things together with coaching in a way that can improve outcomes, right? So those are the outputs. Employees attend trainings, they get more skilled, they receive job supports, and our hope right? Our goal is that this will be good for the firm and good for society. It'll increase employee productivity, increase mobility throughout the firm. Some of the evaluations suggest it will decrease public assistance use, right? If we can help people find and maintain work, it'll reduce the amount of public assistance they receive. It'll decrease barriers to work and increase employee retention. So it's a set of goals both for the companies in and of themselves, and society at large. All right, limitation. Of course, utilization of services and targeting of services. This is a big one. Do we get the services right? And I've really come to be a believer that people vote with their feet. Sometimes we have to convince people that the types of services we have to offer are what they need. But other times, if people aren't coming for the services, maybe that's a sign that at least they don't perceive them as something they need. And so I think one of the exciting things about success coach models is that we can help sort of try to address the needs that people see themselves, right? The things that are really on their minds. I can help you get to work when your car breaks down. And in doing so, maybe you'll be more open to some of the other things that I have to offer going on, right? I've met a need of yours, and so you're more open. Availability of surrounding community resources, right? We are limited to what's in the milieu and what we can stand on and add to, right, with our own services. But that's going to be a key piece of what's accessible overall. Business engagement, right? So this is a model. One of the exciting things about this model is it doesn't require employers, right? It doesn't require employers to wait for to wait for government, right, or philanthropy to really take charge. It's a matter of the success of ERNs is dependent on businesses wanting to really step up. But if businesses aren't invested in it, it's never going to be successful. And then, of course, sort of this question of balancing affordability, right, for employers while also providing enough revenue for robust services, right? You get what you pay for, in essence. And if you try to do it small, sometimes the outcomes will be small. So how do we support the growth of ERNs? We can provide flexible startup grants that help sort of move, get the ball moving. We can bring ERN perspectives to the policymaking process. We can educate employers about the benefits of ERNs and foster employer buy-in and commitment. Again, government cannot be the driving force. Let me talk about just those three things and then end on this very last point. So a couple of the stories that I really like about ERNs are ones where that sort of collective group, right, that businesses can come together and solve a problem that none of them could do on their own. So one example is in Saginaw, Michigan. I know a set of employers got together and saw that they were having trouble filling the graveyard shift, the late evening shift, and talked to employees, right? Maybe use their success coaches to really try to assess, why do you think it's so hard for us to fill those particular jobs? And they heard that childcare was a major barrier to that there weren't any childcare centers that were open during that period of time. So together, the ERN went to one of the major childcare providers in the community and said, hey, we'd like you to start an evening shift, right? An evening childcare shift. And we can help support you in doing that and sort of get it off the ground. And that's been a success story in that community where that became available and it became much easier to fill those positions. So a set of employers, I think none of them on their own could have done that, but together it's stronger. Another example in another community was around a busing system, right? Where you had a set of people who were potentially would like the jobs at a set of ERN companies that just simply couldn't get to the jobs that were available, right? Busing systems either weren't reliable enough, didn't come at the times. And so the ERNs got together to fund a pilot bus, right? They partnered with a transit authority and piloted a bus route that then proved to be extremely popular, right? So it helped them and it also helped the community. So I think these are some of the examples, pairing together the success coaching, right, which is really about problem solving in the immediate and the long term with employees, and also this collective problem solving together where employers can get together and figure out what are the resources we need, whether it be training, whether it be added resources in the community to solve and make things better for everyone. Now, despite all that, I don't want to make it sound like I think ERNs are the silver bullet, right? the same type of thing that I think was reflected in Fred Keller's comment is still here, that this can be a challenge. It's not like retention is going to go from awful to perfect, right? But we know that it does hold promise, that in sort of using these types of models, an ERN, we can improve outcomes over time. And so for that reason, I think it's just a very exciting thing that I think many communities across the country would benefit from. Thank you.
Sorry. Appreciate the overview and all the work that you and Joshua Rivera put in on this report. Before we go to our panelists, I wanted to just loop back on one thing that you said sort of at the beginning of your presentation and try to connect it as kind of the through line of what ERNs are about. And you talked about that people voting with their feet, that employees vote with their feet about the kinds of things that they think they need. They don't always have a perfect understanding of their own needs, but often they do have a pretty good handle on what their biggest needs are in at any particular moment. You also talked about it's critical that this that the agency that we're talking about also be reflected among the employers. The employers have to take on sort of an understanding of their needs and be willing to kind of explore new opportunities, new approaches to addressing those problems. And you talked about how your own view had evolved on this. Could you just expand on that a little bit, on this concept of the importance of honoring agency within these program designs?
Yeah, let me start with the people, right? So I've been in many conversations in the social service world where we have services and sort of the big question is like, how do we get people to come in, right? How do we, they must not know about it, right? So we spend a lot of time doing communications, and I absolutely think communications is important. But sometimes, right, in that conversation, we never really have the conversation about, is what we're offering something people want? And that seems like an important piece of the puzzle, right? And sometimes I think when services are delivered that really fill a need for people, we don't have as much trouble actually getting. Somehow they find out about it. People find out about it and they come walking through the doors. So I think there's a place where the services that people think that low earning workers need, there may be a good case where we say, this is something you don't know you need, but you need. But I think one of the great things about the success coach model is it can meet the needs of people, right? I think we can build trust. We can build rapport with people. If they're having trouble getting to work, they would really like to get to work, right? But their car broke down, they're having a family crisis, and that success coach helps them figure out how to do it, right? That's like, okay, now this person has added value into my life, right? Rather than trying to offer me something that I don't understand that I need to begin with. And so at least sort of pairing these services that immediately address needs as people understand them, I think maybe they'll be more open to other things. Now the question about employers, and so that's, I think over the years, I've just had that conversation a lot about like, gosh, nobody's coming in for the service. And I think that's the evolution that I meant, is just thinking, well, maybe they're not coming in because they don't see it as something that will benefit them. And maybe we should do a lot more of at least giving them something that they feel will benefit them before trying to sell them on the things that we think that they need. Now, the thing with employers is that there's a variety of ways to do something like an ERN, right? So I think employers can say, oh, that kind of sounds interesting. We'll sort of dip our foot in, right? Or I'll throw a little bit of money at it. My friend at the other company really wants to do it, and we'll try it. But if they're not really committed to it, I'm not sure that it works? I guess I'll sort of defer that question to both James and Jason. It just seems like they have to say, you know, we're going to be thoughtful about this. And some of that thoughtfulness is trying to understand their workers, right? That's where the success coach, right, can also be an intermediary to say, no, why do you think we're having trouble with our graveyard shift? Sometimes it's thoughtful about the community, right? So it's about like, what are the added resources? Sometimes it's probably being thoughtful about their own practices. So I've been doing a lot of work in the city of Detroit around workforce development, and we've done a number of papers on barriers to work that people have, whether it's disabilities or low education or a criminal record. Then we decided to look at the job postings in the community. And we were kind of struck to find out that I think 25% of all job postings required you to have a driver's license or auto insurance, which maybe seems reasonable on its face, but it actually turns out Detroit has the highest auto insurance rates in the entire country. The same policy that costs $1,300 nationally, $5,400 a year in Detroit, right? And that's just outrageous. And you know, there's all sorts of well-intentioned policies that sort of went wrong that got us to that point. The other thing is, like, if you get caught driving without insurance in Michigan, we're very quick to take people's licenses away. We've actually suspended about 300,000 licenses. Now, I'm not saying, in some cases, an employer might really need their worker to have auto insurance and a driver's license, but this being thoughtful, right? What I'm sort of thinking is maybe they could look at their jobs and say, do we really need them to have auto insurance? Do we really need them to have a driver's license? Or is there some other way that we can be successful as a company and not make those requirements, because it might really improve, you know, our group? So it's looking at workers, it's looking at the community, and it's looking at themselves.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke. So first question for our discussion. And then the way I'd like to do this is I'm going to pose the question to an individual, one of you three, and then that person responds. And if something comes up in their response, or if there's something that you want to add into to, you know, sort of add nuance to the answer to this question, then, or if you've got a disagreement, or, you know, something like that, just go ahead and weigh in. But we'll start with James. James, and I just want to give people kind of a sense of the big picture of your involvement in ERNs. What brought you to this? How did you find your way into establishing a nonprofit in your own community, and then helping others to do that same thing? What's that journey been like for you?
Sure. And thanks, Brent and AEI, for hosting this event today. We appreciate being involved. Back in the early 2000s, when we got started, I was a VP of HR for a manufacturing company in Grand Rapids. And we had high turnover. It was a very tight labor market. We worked with our local university, and we GIS mapped our workforce and found that about 80% were within a 2-mile radius of the plant, which was basically walk to work or catching rides from each other. And it was the highest concentration of poverty in the county. So understanding our workforce, we went back and we looked at our employee benefits, and probably 90% of our staff were entry level or plant workers, and maybe 10% were office workers. And as we looked at our employee benefit, or traditional employee benefits, nobody was using the 401k except the office people. Nobody was using tuition reimbursement. Nobody was using our employee assistance program. We had less than 1% utilization of that. And then, you know, we provided free health care for the employees. So there was no cost to that, but we did have to do some education around finding primary care physicians and things like that. So there was an educational component. But when we started talking to the employees, the things that they were dealing with were, you know, car broke down, I need my car repaired, utilities shut off, I just had one last week where, an employee's furnace went out and he doesn't have the funding to replace it. So it's that work-life balance issue that we thought there's got to be a better way for us to do this. And oftentimes the public sector and the nonprofit sector are driven by income eligibility. And, so what we wanted to do was we wanted to create a program. So we see the success coach as an employee benefit, where a success coach comes on site at the company, sits down with the employee, and then we'll do, we track about 30 different service categories. So we're not saying we just do financial literacy or just do, these 2 or 3 services. We sit down and find out what the issue is with the employee. And then the success coach is networked with all the nonprofits and public sector agencies. So they go out and they try to braid together a solution. So, and by doing so, by having that set up, we couldn't afford a success coach by ourselves. So we had 7 other companies in the group, and it was kind of a fractional ownership. So we each had a share of the success coach's time to be able to make it cost effective for us to do it. So that's kind of the beginning. The problem we were trying to solve was high turnover, which if you look at the cost of turnover, that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet anywhere or financials anywhere, for the company, but it is a big cost when you consider all the time and effort and training and interviewing and lost production and stuff like that. So it was really a business solution driven rationale as to how we came up with what we did.
I'm curious, you mentioned the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, which sounds like the same thing, but is actually quite a different animal. And in the report that I think Luke mentions that there's very low uptake on EAPs and substantially higher uptake on on the ERN approach. How do you deal with the issue of stigma? I know that with EAPs, if somebody goes to an EAP, that is like normally kind of a red flag. Something is really, really wrong. But that's not really what ERNs are for.
Right. And I think, employees haven't used it because it's a 1-800 number and they don't really have a relationship or know who they're talking to. I think they also don't trust that HR isn't getting a list of who went to the EAP, and then that's going to be questioned as to, their employment status and stuff, which HR doesn't. But, that's kind of the stigma that EAPs have. And back then, EAPs were strictly dealing with more the psychological, the counseling aspect, whereas the ERNs are dealing with the physical, barriers to employment, again, like housing, childcare, those types of things. So we really found a niche, and we had less than 1% utilization of our EAP because it was this 1-800 number out here. But then right now, I think we're averaging about 15% utilization of the success coach is part of the ERN.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add something there on top of that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the stigma of the usage of an EAP or an ERN. And one of the things that we actually noticed when we first implemented ours, we were very cognizant of trying to keep the coach in a room, they're in an office, right, that there was very little visibility, so people could have that privacy and use the ERN services. One day, that room that she was typically in was booked, and so she moved into a conference room that actually had windows to the outside plant. And it was unbelievable the response we got, because people were asking people, the people that were in the room, hey, what were you there for? Well, this person was helping me do this. Oh, there's someone that can help us do that? And it just ballooned on us, and upped our usage just tremendously. Just that visibility of, hey, there's someone here to help us through things. Because I think you touched on it in a couple different ways. A lot of times people are working, right? So they don't necessarily have the ability to go get that governmental resource or go visit that governmental office, because that governmental office is only open 8 to 5, or whatever it might be, where the folks are working right now. And if they're working, they don't think they're able to get those resources. Well, that's where this coach comes into play for us a lot of times. So
Yeah,
the
and
stigma piece just completely blew us away, that there wasn't necessarily a stigma, once people understood what the pros could be for them.
I love
Yeah,
that example too with the helping, right? So that's the goal. So if the service is saying, hey, there's something wrong with you, and you can call this number and you can get fixed, that's one thing, and that sends a certain set of messages. If it's like, hey, here's an added person who can just help you navigate these complicated processes, right? They're not going to look down on you. They're just going to be a problem solver. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah, I think that we see this in a lot of different kinds of coaching models. This idea that there's somebody there as a skilled friend rather than a therapist or somebody who's there to intervene and drive change in your life. It's really about someone helping you think about your challenges, what you need to fix, and then really helping the individual kind of surface those things, because sometimes that is intuitive, that we sense that there's something that we need to do, but we're not really sure what it is, much less what to do about it. And that's what coaching really does for people. And it's all about building a relationship with the employee. So Jason, I wanted to give you a chance too to talk a little bit about your journey in this with the ERN work. This hasn't been your life's work, but the ERNs, but human resources have. And how did you find your way, and how did your company find your way into an employer resource network?
Yeah, a couple quick stories on that. It started with us with a workshop I was at, where we were having the discussions about, what are some of the challenges that people, our employees were having and so forth. And it really rung true to me, because just prior to that workshop, I had I had a great employee in one of my facilities, and they were there, they were working hard, there every day, and just doing a great job. Well, all of a sudden, the gentleman was gone for 3 days straight with no word what happened. And typically our policy would be to the 3 day no call no show, we would terminate. But I reached out to them and tried to track him down, because like I said, he had worked for us for 3-4 weeks and was just doing such a great job. And what I found out was that his brakes had gone bad in his car, and that week that he had been working there with us, or the previous week, he had been walking to work, and he was waiting for his check to come in so that he could get his brakes fixed and come back to work. And it just blew me away, because it was something I had not experienced before. It's a simple $400 brake job, could prevent this person. And the reason he wasn't coming to work was because the last 3 days, it was raining like you couldn't imagine. And he couldn't walk to work through that rain, and make it. So fast forward then to that workshop, and that these things just started clicking in my head. And if you look at our company, we've been around for just around 50 years. We've got a lot of long-term employees. Well, right after the great recession happened here, we expanded pretty drastically. So we started bringing in all these new employees that were having challenges that we weren't used to, that we weren't equipped to help with, just because we hadn't had that experience. And so through that workshop, I was introduced to James. We talked about some of the challenges we were having. And that's how we came on board and started using the ERN as a resource.
Thanks, Jason. Let's go back to James and just talk about to us about, you came from HR. I've been in workforce development for 20 years now. From a policy standpoint, we have these things called American Job Centers that are funded by the government to provide support to workers of all kinds as they're in need of training, in need of supportive services. How do you see the ERNs as being different than what we do through the American Jobs Center Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act programs.
Yeah, I think, the sole focus of the ERN and the success coach is supporting the employees or the incumbent workers of the member companies. So we're not trying to work here in Michigan, it's called Michigan Works. So we're not trying to do pre-employment stuff. We may align with a nonprofit like a Goodwill or a Hope Network, or like 70x7, which is a reentry program in Holland, to align with that agency who's doing the pre-employment stuff. And then when we end up hiring somebody, we've got a process of onboarding them with a success coach that may be a little bit more intensive, depending on the individual employee's background. But again, my experience as an HR person, when the Workforce Development Center says, well, we do retention services, what that means is they call me every month to make sure the employee's still working. They're not really actively working with the employee on, like the issue that Brent raised. Breaks go out, he's 3 weeks into employment, Michigan Works was not there to help that employee. But the success coach is able to work with the employee and trying to find a resource to help fix the breaks and make sure the person gets back to work, or find a ride share for a period of time while they, get the car fixed. So I think that's where it's a little bit different. And then, it seems like the public workforce system is got all these different categories. You've got youth programming, so you got to be between 16 and 24 for this funding, or you've got to be for the Trade Adjustment Act, you have to be this population, and for this, you've got to be this population. We try to meld all that together for the employers. So if we're working with the workforce development system, the employers don't need to know all those things. We just need to figure out how to mainstream it, so when they come into the company, that the employee has access to a success coach. And we're very deliberate about using success coach, not case manager, not something like that, which sounds very clinical, because the relationship continues from, okay, I've got help you get your car fixed, let's do some financial literacy. The executives at your company have executive coaches professionally. You have a coach. And so if you want to take additional training, what's the next step for you? And so it's success coaching, not, basic case management. And I think that's where sometimes we have that disconnect with the public sector. And we have an opportunity because the success coach is on site at the company every week. And so they can reinforce those relationships. Whereas once they get a job, rarely does that employee go back to the workforce center to see their caseworker.
So we have this problem of fragmentation within the workforce system, where we divide up workers into various pockets. We try to, fit them into whatever the funding source is. To what degree are you seeing, and not just across the system, to what degree are you seeing non-low wage workers utilizing ERN services? So, people who don't fit the kind of the picture we have in our head of an entry-level employee, or somebody who's maybe got those barriers or whatever, but just what percentage or what ratio do you think of people taking advantage of these are?
Yeah, a rough estimate, what we've seen, nationally across the ERNs, and we adopted some of the United Way language around ALICE, the Assets Limited Income Constrained Employed. So we probably have about 40% that are receiving public benefits. We had a gentleman who was living in the woods behind his plant for his work and going in to warm up at night, and that extreme to probably another 40% that are the ALICE population. They're beyond the benefit cliff. but sometimes they have greater needs. So the success coach has to braid together maybe a food pantry with, some other resources to solve the problem of the budget shortfall for the family. And then we do have about 20% that are, office workers or managers and things like that. A $80,000 a year manager going through a divorce and having to split households is equally as in crisis as, somebody in the Ellis population. And so, we've had VP of HR for one of the manufacturing companies. Her father was early stages of Alzheimer's and moving in with her and her husband. And the success coach was able to help them navigate the Medicare system and then find some place for dad to go during the day while they went to work. Now, she's got a graduate degree. She probably could have spent a couple hours figuring it out, but by having a success coach who's plugged into that system, very easily, got the answers that she needed.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say the navigating the government agencies is really where we see a lot more of that. I'll say the usage of our salary workforce. But you look at the statistics, right? What do they say? 50% or more of the U.S. population doesn't have $1,000 in savings. So, whether it be an unexpected death or something of that nature, right? Hey, where do we come up with the funds for this type of thing, right? This is where, the ERN can help us bridge those gaps where maybe 30, 40 years ago when we were a smaller company and fewer employees, the company would write a check. Well, we can't just do that now. Because there's so many people in need. And that's where this ERN has really helped us in those aspects. But yeah, whether you be divorced, elder care, all those things are very big with that, I'll say that non-low wage worker population for us.
So Jason, this is a program that you pay for, that it has a value to you as a company. It is producing some sort of offsetting savings for you that helps cover the cost of the services that you're purchasing. It's solving problems for you. How do you measure your return on investment as a business that takes advantage of this?
Yeah, I will say there's two pieces to it. There is a financial piece, right? Which is the return on investment. And James and his team have done an excellent job of helping to provide us numbers on a monthly basis of how many people are using the services, how many people are engaging, and then, what's that retention of those folks that are using the services. And so we see that as hey, this is a cost save for us, because anytime we have to, we lose an employee, that's going to cost us money in overtime while we find a replacement. And right now it's very difficult to find replacements, as well as, the cost just to train someone new. So there is an associated cost. I couldn't tell you exactly what that number is, but there is an associated cost. The other piece of it is we feel that it's really our duty to help our folks and be a good member of the community by helping our folks, through some of these issues. A lot of times, right, wrong, or differently, the folks that, are re-entering the job in the workforce aren't used to diversity. And what I mean by that is, as soon as they encounter some type of diversity in their lives, if the answer isn't right there and available for them, they kind of throw up their hands and, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to quit because I don't know how to work through this. And that ERN has really helped us, reach out to those folks and help those folks and assist those folks in a way that HR traditionally hasn't had we traditionally haven't been able to do. If you were to come to me and say, hey, I'm about ready to get evicted, Jason, what do I do? I wouldn't know how to handle that, right? But that's where that ERN is able to help us handle that. And we feel it as part of our mission, if you will, or our being a good corporate partner with our employees, that we can help and provide that opportunity. So yes, there is a financial piece to it, but there's also a broader being a good citizen of the area piece.
Yeah, that reminds me of my visit with James back in 2008, where I think that was the first time I ever encountered the idea of the idea of the triple bottom line, where you have profit, and then you have I think in the case of the company we were talking to, it was Cascade Engineering, talking about the environmental returns, but then also the social return. This is what we have identified as part of our mission as an employer, is to contribute to a social return to the community around us.
And I think, some of the companies that have been in ERNs for, like Sunset Association is in the group with Brent. We've got 3 manufacturing and 2 long-term care. Sunset is one of the long-term care, and they've been doing it for quite a while. When they interview people, they have candidates actually say, I want to work at Sunset because I heard you have a success coach that can help with XYZ. So they see it as a competitive advantage, even though they're doing it for the right reasons of helping their employees. A CNA that needs to get to work is going to know that, hey, this is an additional employee benefit that I can get here that I can't get anywhere else.
I just wanted to
Go back-
quickly
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I just really like the way Jason said it about sort of the motivation for this. So in my mind, it's too much to ask an employer to only do this because of the social benefit, right? So I don't think we should expect employers to be social service agencies to, only do things. I think they're firms that are, trying to do well. And but if we combine that, right, I think this sort of the triple threat that you mentioned sort of combines saying, you know what, I do this in part because it does help me with productivity. It doesn't 100% solve all my productivity problems, but I think as a company you can probably watch, right? We added a success coach, and we saw our retention of our entry level workforce improve over a period of time relative to what we would have expected, right? Adjusting for businesses. And on top of that, it's the right thing to do. So sort of trying to combine those 2 pieces together seems like the right approach.
Yeah, and that was my next question, actually. I wanted to go to that, which is, you make reference to this in the report that, there are a lot of things that people try in this area and all other areas of social policy where it looks really good. It looks like it's successful. It seems to be helping. You also acknowledge, though, in the report that that selection bias could be at work in this project. That the most able, the most open, the most the people who have sort of this intangible capacity for seeking help are the ones who are seeking it and finding it, and that may introduce a kind of selection bias into this. So I want you to address that, but I also, I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether, even if that were true, would this still be worth doing?
Yeah, there are actually 2 selection processes here, right? There's a selection process of people engaging the success coach and who sort of shows up for help and who doesn't, and what would their outcomes have been one way or the other. There's also the selection of the firms, right? So Jason, was seeing these issues before he tuned in. And so as the researcher, there's a question for me about, is it just that Jason's firm is thinking about these things? They could have done a variety of things, or is it the ERN model in particular? So in terms of like evaluation, the nice thing is, we don't, if it's driven by employers, I, of course, love to do randomized controlled trials where we separate people into experimental groups and to control groups. And, it helps me sleep at night when you can see the effect. But, in the real world, if Jason adopts an ERN and decides a set of metrics that he's going to watch, so I would say a set of metrics sort of on retention, right? On productivity. Are people more likely to show up for work? Does he have fewer people not calling in, 3 days in a row who are otherwise good employees? And then, the outcome metrics, like, are people showing up at the success coach, right? That's, if there's still only 1% of people going to the success coach, maybe we're not doing the success coach quite right, right? So there are a set of very tangible things that I think employers can set. And so I would say, like, commit to it. Decide what is the reasonable amount of time before you would see results. And then if you're doing better on those things, then, I think we can worry less about is that the only model that would sort of show you success versus like it's one that has in the real world outside of, you know, nerdy Professor Shaefer's sort of randomized controlled trials. And then, you know, I also am a believer in like policy wins of, so I love the new bus line, right? If employers get together and they say, you know what we really need is a bus that will bring people at 6 p.m. and take them home at midnight. And the greatest proof in the pudding, right? As I said, Milton Friedman says, people vote with their feet, is like, do people take the bus to work? You know, is that bus line full? Then I think we have to worry less. So, you know, I would love to do a randomized controlled trial of this sort of thing, but there are just lots of different metrics where we can say, okay, I think this is, I saw my retention improved. I saw my productivity improved. I've been thoughtful about that. So I've adjusted for the fact that, you know, other things in the environment might have affected those too a bit. And I think it's a good investment for me, sort of based on this framing of like, it's good for my company and also good for society.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, it's a, you know, helping somebody who maybe isn't completely the hardest off person is not a no value proposition. You know,
absolutely.
Aren't the hardest up doesn't mean that they don't have significant challenges, and that in supporting them through those, you're actually helping to kind of raise the boats in the community by, you know, kind of reducing stress and increasing opportunity. That's a value too. So I agree with you. I don't think that it should be strictly like, you know, we need an RCT that's going to show us that if we put $1 into this, we generate $5 in savings or profit or whatever. It's more diffuse than that, and that doesn't mean that it isn't worth doing. Jason, did you want to say something about that?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, you know, the return on the investment, you know, and you can do all the measures financially all you want, but, you know, when we actually jumped into this, you know, we were in a labor market. So what was it, about a year and a half ago, James, I think we started. But, you know, we're in a labor market, right? Where it was just going out of control. So, you know, retention, you could make sure that those people were using or that were staying with you through retention, but turnover was happening everywhere, you know, because there were so many more opportunities for people. But what really, you know, opened our eyes was just the straight usage. Hey, there is a need here for this. This is filling a need that, you know, we weren't necessarily aware existed because we were using it so much. You know, 26, 27, whatever the number is a month, people a month are using these services. So that's what really helped us sell it, you know, as we were trying to expand it right before the COVID hit, is that, hey, there's a need that we were not aware, we were not filling that void. And this is a way for us to fill that void. You know, whatever.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the relationship between the success coach and the employer, you know, so if you're doing a lot of hiring, maybe the success coach is involved in the orientation. So we get that relationship of trust built right off the bat, and they know who, you know, Christy is in your situation. We have about 80% of employees go to the success coach on their own. And then about 20% are supervisor referrals because we educate the supervisors, co-workers making referrals because they've been helped through the program, and then HR referrals. So HR may see somebody that's struggling and make a recommendation for them to go see the coach. So we're trying not to miss those, you know, well, maybe the hardest served aren't getting to the coach. You know, we're trying to find ways of you know, encouraging them through coworkers and supervisors and stuff. So
so my next question is about the amount of emphasis within the program on kind of skills development. We talked a lot about sort of problem solving, helping employees figure out solutions to issues with their family or their transportation or whatever. But the advancement part of this is something we want to pay attention to as well. And I'm curious for both James and Jason, like, what's the role of the ERN in terms of helping people advance in employment, to get up to the next rung in the job, to gain the skills that they need in order to be able to advance in their employment.
So James, I mean, I'll be honest with you, we have not really scratched the surface on that portion of it yet, Brent. You know, so I'm going to rely on James and what he's done with some of his other clients, if you will, or other companies he's worked with. But that's not an area that we've really even been able to scratch the surface. So.
Yeah, sorry, everything kind of froze.
Problem there.
But it's up to each ERN what their priorities are. So like I said, you know, Jason's group has 3 manufacturing and 2 healthcare. So, you know, some of the, you know, workplace stability or financial literacy or diversity training, you know, so that's not really skill-based, but it's, you know, culture building. I know you had a question on here about rural counties. We have had our Oceana Learn meeting this morning, and they've have 5 food processing companies that are in there, and they're out of district for the 2 community colleges. So there's a community college in the county to the north and a community college in the county to the south, but they don't have anything in their county. And what they did was they worked with a training provider, took a curriculum from Canada for food processing quality, were able to put together a registered apprenticeship with the Department of Labor. And now what they're doing is they broke it up into level 1, level 2. Level 2 is entry-level employees starting at their company. And their hope is to get level 1 into the junior, senior year of high school. And so, you know, because, you know, the students are graduating and then they're driving to larger markets, but if they can show them that they have opportunity within Oceana County, you know, that the companies came together where one company wouldn't do it by themselves, but, you know, 5 employers were able to get that registered apprenticeship through USDOL. So, you know, that's a very deliberate way of looking at skill building. And then I think a third thing is where, you know, like Fabricale down in Kalamazoo has all employees have to select a pathway. And so, you know, we've had examples of employees that, you know, get to a point and they're struggling with the math component. The company already has defined out the classes they need to take, but the coach will find the employee a tutor in the community that can help them get over the part that they're struggling with, so that they can graduate the class and then move up to the next level. So sometimes it's case by case, other times it's the employers coming together to create something.
Brent, if I could just say a quick word on this.
Yeah.
My understanding is that one of the big changes in terms of the human capital of workers is that employers do a lot less. As a general rule, they do a lot less training, investing in training than they did 30 years ago. And I think some of that is because the labor market's become more dynamic. People don't stay with the same company, or at least that's the perception. But, you know, often government, this is one of those things that I think government sometimes is challenged with to, you know, if the idea is that they're the ones that are going to provide the training, they often don't quite know what companies actually need, right? Or even like if they get the topic right, companies have very specific sort of things, you know, that how they want things done. So I like to think that ERN is one way to sort of thread the needle on this one, right? To say if some groups of employers can get together and train collectively, right, in a similar field, they can get it right more, and sort of provide that product that I think government struggles to provide. And in one company on its own feels like this is too much lift for us, and we worry whether or not it's sort of a good investment given how often people move on.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a company here in Michigan, we have something called used to be the it's called Going Pro. So it's a training grant for incumbent workers. And a company like Jason's is large enough where they could fill a class, they could probably run it however many times they need to, but it's, the 100 employee smaller manufacturer that may benefit from a consortium grant, and then the ERN would really work with them to put together, if we need welding or we need CNC training or something like that, or even OSHA training or, iOS, training and stuff like that, that we build a class together with, maybe a couple people from each of the companies, as opposed to fill a class, as opposed to them not doing it because they can't take all their supervisors off the floor at the same time.
Okay, we have some questions coming in via social media and email, and I wanted to start getting some of those on the table. First, from Mark Fabian at the University of Cambridge. And he's noting that there are some similarities here between this model and the flexicurity models that we see in Scandinavia. And his question is, do you see opportunities to deepen the connections between ERNs and unions? Is that, has that come up? I mean, James, you're working up in the upper Midwest, a lot of manufacturing. How does this happen with the, or how does it interface with unions, unionized representation? And I don't know if Luke or any, Luke has any thought on the comparison to flexicurity, but why don't we start with the relationship with labor unions?
Yeah, I think Next Year Automotive is a good example. They're a GM supplier union shop, and had to be very careful and deliberate when we went in there with Kathy Miller. So, one, we were recruiting the company to be part of the Great Lakes Bay ERN, but we also had a direct conversation with the union because the union was providing the EAP for the company. And so having that sit down with the union to say, this is how the success coach is different, how it can work with the EAP and the benefit it's going to bring your members. It was a very transparent, open conversation. And as soon as they saw that there was a benefit to their members, then they were on board, as opposed to management, the company, forcing it on the union as a project that they wanted to do. And so we got buy-in from both sides to make sure that, we wouldn't get any resistance or barriers thrown up by the union when we tried to roll it out.
It's a very interesting kind of topic of, sort of where does this fit within the overall structure of benefit programs for employees, and I suspect that the transparency issue is always foremost when you're dealing with that, whether it's unionized or not. Just sort of paying attention to, the instant I think I would guess a kind of instant anxiety that goes along with this when you're trying to get a new ERN started, that maybe this is about taking something else away or substituting a private effort for a provision in a union negotiated contract or something like that. So have you encountered that elsewhere in the country?
Most of the ERN member companies are non-union, so we haven't really encountered it that much. I know with hospitals and stuff like that, you've got nurses unions and things like that, and it's never been an issue. But, I think it's being able to use the success coach and targeting it where the problem is. So, we've had some companies that have a problem with second shift retention. And so maybe that's where we focus the efforts of the success coach, even though they're available to any employee. But, we're very careful that, the union and the company know that, everything is confidential. So if an employee comes talk to the success coach, there's not a note in the employee's file about that. We don't share anything. If there's a referral from a supervisor, we let the supervisor know, yes, James came and saw me, but they don't know what we talked about. There are a couple instances where do no harm, we have to let the employer know. So if somebody is a high-low driver and it appears that they've been drinking, the coach will say, go tell your supervisor or HR that you've got to go home. Otherwise I have to, because we can't have you driving heavy equipment in that state. So, and then we did have an active shooter issue, at one company at one time where, again, we're not law enforcement, so we're not stepping in the middle of things, but, there is kind of that coaching piece that has to go into working with the other employees that end up being involved in that type of situation.
So the next question we have from viewers is related to expansion, and they're thinking of it primarily in terms of what's the future for expanding ERNs nationally. But I'm also interested in hearing from Jason, just from the employer perspective, about what's it like internally. Right now, it sounds like a pretty lean and kind operation, not lean and mean, but lean and kind. And you want to keep it that way, but you also want to provide as much as you can. So what's for Jason, what's the discussion about expansion among already established ERNs, both for individual employers and networks? And James, if you could kick us off, just talk a little bit about what you see as the future of ERNs as part of the national network.
Yeah, so we have ERN USA is kind of the umbrella, and then we have New York ERN, where we have several ERNs, and Ohio ERN, and they kind of roll up underneath ERN USA. We have about 12 new communities we're working with from Pennsylvania and Alabama and Florida. I think Luke had some of those on the map that he showed, but we have not been actively, pushing ERN as a solution. Everything has been by word of mouth, where Jason may be at a conference and he talks about his experience, and then I get a call from another employer, from another state that says, hey, how do we get something like that started here? But, we do have a very developed collaborative development process that we walk through in a playbook, and typically work with a community to help them get up and running as part of the network. And then, they have their own administrator, and they, run kind of like a franchise or an independent, within their state.
So Jason, before we go to you, there's another question on Twitter that's related to this, which is, what do you see when people start thinking about establishing ERNs in their communities? What are some of the common roadblocks that come up that you help them deal with, or things that actually end up, preventing the establishment of an ERN?
Yeah, and sometimes it's funding. We've had a couple smaller communities where they didn't have, again, more rural, where they didn't have a healthy community foundation or, funding. So I think that was one of the roadblocks. When we initially meet with a community, whether it's a nonprofit agency that would be the administrator, or we always mandate that they have a employer champion as part of the design team. And then when we talk to them, we have a kind of a locator tool that we use, and a series of questions that they can ask. And if they don't have a piece of it, then we can make suggestions as to, well, we need to really, strengthen this area of relationship within the community to make sure that, the employers either see, how this is going to benefit them, or to be non-threatening, where you've got nonprofits in the community that are going to throw up roadblocks because they think they're doing what an ERN does. And so again, I think if we do those educational pieces and then we bring the employers together for an exploratory meeting, those are kind of the things that we think about before getting started with the employers is, are there roadblocks, with the public sector, nonprofit sector, that we've got to, have transparent conversations. This is what we're really trying to do. We see you as partners. And then the employer, whether it's through economic development or chambers or workforce boards, that we're having those conversations to identify an employer champion. So.
Terrific. Okay, Jason, I want to come back to you now and just talk about sort of the conversation among the participating employers about this and about the ERN and meeting demand. Is it something you think about expanding? Is it something that you just create and try to maintain? What's the attitude of employers that take part in this?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really been our focus. And we kind of alluded to it a little earlier. Right before the pandemic hit, we were looking at increasing our overall usage. Again, just some context: Lacks is a company of about 3,000 employees. With a large percentage of that employee base being hourly workforce. And what we did, how we did is we kind of dipped our toe in a little bit and, if you will, bought a week to service a couple of plants. And as we saw the usage and of the services and what that was able to do for our teams, that's where we started saying, hey, about 6 months into this, I think it was James, we said, hey, this is something we want to expand and use and do more of. And we started those conversations, like I said, right before the pandemic. And we never got to put them fully in place, but it's something, now that everything's, at least for our industry, is back going 110%, we're now having to look at this and say, okay, how do we now do this? How do we increase that presence in our facilities? Because we've got, again, we're unique. We're 3,000 employees, but we got 25 facilities that we're spread across, all here in the same geographical area, but we're spread out. So having a success coach at just one facility doesn't really, help the other 24. So that's what's really driving us to be able to spread that. And I think the other thing, and you just touched on it a little bit, is how do you get the companies to understand the capability of this? Because a lot of times I think from the top down they say, hey, we already have an EAP. Why do I need this? And that's one of the challenges, for us to help overcome and show exactly what that need is, right? This is an awful example, but it's the one I think, highlights it the best, is that an EAP is very good at grief counseling, but an EAP doesn't help with funeral cost. And that's, again, it's an awful example to use, but I think it highlights exactly what the difference there is. And where there's, the community resources that the ERN has can help with those types of things where, families and our employees, can struggle. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. James, did you want to add to that?
Yeah. Each ERN, again, it's employer driven. So the employers make the decision. And, Brent, when you and I met 2008, we were in a booming economy, hit the recession. The employers get to decide, how we act. And so the focus of hiring people before the recession hit to supporting your existing employees who are still working. And then we came into the same thing with COVID. We were in a booming economy, and then COVID hits. And then, I know, Jason, you had most of your workforce laid off. So the coach helping them connect with unemployment insurance, navigating that system, other supports. But each ERN decides, how big they want to be. Right now, Jason's in a group with 5, each has a day a week. We have 3 more employers in Grand Rapids that want to be part of an ERN, and the 5 existing employers get to vote to say if we can bring on a time success coach to augment our capacity, and we've got employers that want to join, do we want to be a group of 8? And so those discussions happen at the monthly meetings or with the employers. We have some ERNs like Southwest Michigan that have 30 employers and 4 success coaches. And then we have others that say, no, we want to start a separate ERN. And so you end up with 2 or 3 ERNs within a urban area like a Grand Rapids or other larger communities.
Okay, so we have one more question here, and it relates to a question that I had but didn't get to. What are the qualities of a good success coach that you've noticed, James or Jason, either of you? It's like, what are the characteristics? And the question I had was, have you ever had the experience of taking somebody who was an employee working at a company, was involved in and was getting services through an ERN, who then became a success coach? That the word of mouth advertising sort of gets to this, like it's important to have credible people that are helping to share the word. So those are kind of related questions, but I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, and we look for somebody that has, case management experience, but if it's an employee that's gone to the same location for the last 30 years, sat in a cubicle, are they going to be comfortable driving around to eight different companies and 8 different cultures? And are they going to be tech savvy enough to get on each of those, Wi-Fi systems or, VPNs to be able to be effective? We have had 3 HR folks from member companies actually become success coaches, because, they love the HR role, but they're also on like the school board or nonprofit boards, and they have a heart for the community. So they're plugged into both. They can learn the case management notes and stuff like that. We use Salesforce as our data tracking across all the ERNs. And then we've had, Jason has actually a worker from the state Department of Health and Human Services here in Michigan, so they can actually transact public programs and sign somebody up for food assistance or a state emergency relief. So we've got 3 or 4 of those, but they have to know the business relationship as well. So it's not government as usual. They have to get to know the culture of the company and HR, form that relationship, and then be very approachable to the employees. So, and then we have some nonprofit success coaches, from like Lutheran Social Services in Toledo and other nonprofits. And then the 4 coaches in Southwest Michigan are actually employees of the Upjohn Institute. And so we've had a long-standing kind of a research relationship with them from the early days where they did some evaluations and stuff, and they came up with the return on investment formula that we use. And so that's something I'd be happy to share with you, Brent, and in the group. So
that's terrific. Okay, so we've reached pretty much the end of our time here, first, I want to just ask, are there any closing thoughts from anybody, from any of our panelists who had something that they really wanted to say and didn't get a chance to say?
I guess just I wanted to mention that one of the great things about the ERN, I think, in work on poverty alleviation and prevention and workforce development, we're often sort of sitting around waiting, maybe waiting for government or waiting for sort of a change in a community. And the great thing is, if there's a handful of employers in a community that want to get to work, right, and do something that will help them and will help society, they can do this, right? And if they're committed to it, I think some exciting things can happen. So I hope it's empowering to employers, and I think it'd be great if the interest of AEI spurs, a couple couple more states to have ERNs that enter into the fold.
Yeah, I hope so too. That's a big part of why I wanted to do this, both the analysis and this event, to talk about this. It's really the single, sort of most exciting aspect of this to me, is we see the world around us and we want to be part of changing it, of fixing problems that are making life more difficult for people and making communities, adding to the struggles of communities. And the great thing about this, and I really want to congratulate James for his vision and his work on this, is that this is all bottom up. This is all about people taking responsibility for the challenges in their communities, of looking at people in a holistic way as both workers and as people who are embedded in families and communities, and saying we can only thrive if we're thriving together, and taking steps to not just to talk about problems, but to do something about them. So all of you, thank you so much for your work and your dedication on this really important topic. We look forward to staying in touch as ERNs grow. We hope to see a lot of growth, and I don't see the challenges that ERNs address as getting any easier. So this kind of work is really vital. Again, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you to the audience too, for hanging with us. This is a long time to commit, and we appreciate your time, and hope that you'll be in touch with us if you've got more questions. We can help you connect to any of the panelists, and AEI wants to be a resource to you for both understanding us and hopefully doing it. So again, many thanks to all the panelists and to the audience, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.